As the early Methodist movement began to gain some energy 300-ish years ago in England, the founder of the movement, the leader of the movement, John Wesley, and if you don't know much about John Wesley, you'll hear some about him. He launched this thing called Methodism, sometimes called the Wesleyan tradition. Wesley would bring the preachers together, and he would bring them together so they could encourage each other, and so they could worship together, and so they could figure out what needed to be tweaked. Maybe something wasn't going the way it should and they needed to re-strategize or redeploy, but they would come together to do those sorts of things. Figure out where's the next mission? What does God want to do? How can we be available for His purposes? And on one occasion, they asked what I like to call the why question. You know about the why question, right? Perhaps you've asked the why question as individuals, perhaps as a church. Why does God have us in this place doing this thing during this season? Why? Why are we here? Why has He called us to be present now? And the way that Wesley and those early Methodists answered that question would define them. And it would continue to define the movement, the Wesleyan Methodist movement, when we're at our best to the present day. You might be thinking, well, how did they answer the why question? Their answer was brief. It's fairly simple, quite straightforward. Why does God have us here in this place at this time? This is how they answered it, and this is a quote. They said, we're here to spread scriptural holiness across the land. We're here to spread scriptural holiness across the land. That was their mission. It was their passion. It's what they did. And we don't often think about it this way, but we're only here in the Wesleyan Methodist tradition, in a new Methodist denomination, because they took the spread of scriptural holiness as their mission. We're here because of how they answered the why question. This, for them and for us, is what it means to be Methodists. Now you might ask, why were they so committed to that? Scriptural holiness. Like, why are they so committed to this holiness message that they would come together and ask their question and, like, this is who we are, this is what we do. Why were they stuck on that? You get a clue from the way the answer to the question is phrased. Not just holiness, but scriptural holiness. Why were Wesley and the early Methodists committed to the call to holiness and made it the heart and center of their mission? Why? Because they found it in their Bibles. Not just once, not just twice, page after page after page, Old Testament, New Testament, prophets, law, writings, gospels, epistles, all of it. We'll skim the surface real quick with a few examples. In Exodus 19, God has just delivered His people with signs of power, works of power from slavery in Egypt. He's brought them to a mountain, Mount Sinai, and when they got there, He made them into a nation. They were slaves yesterday, literally slaves the day before. But He's brought them out, and He says, now you're my people, and I'm your God. And I want you to be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. You're constituted as a people. This is the kind of people I want you to be. This God takes former slaves and makes them holy. Flip a few books on over to Leviticus 19. We're going to talk more about Leviticus 19 in a few minutes. But if you read through it, you hear this repeated phrase, this repeated sentence. God says to Israel over and over and over again, I, the Lord your God, am holy. Therefore, you should be holy too. Again, it's not just once. He says it again and again and again. Not just Old Testament, but New Testament. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15. Almost sounds like Peter's been reading Leviticus. Peter says, as he who called you is, be, starting to get the idea, right? This isn't a one-off isolated thing. Be holy yourselves in all your conduct. And then this is one of the most striking ones. 1 Thessalonians 4:3. One of the most striking passages in the whole Bible to me. Because it starts out, this is God's will for you. Anybody want to know God's will for their life? No one. Jody and Clay. No one else. Anybody want to know God's will for your life? All right, there we go. That's good. It's better. You know what it says? This is God's will for you, your sanctification. You know what that means? Holiness. It's just the process whereby God makes his people holy. I've met college students who ask, what's God's will for my life? I've met retired persons who ask, I got to figure out what God's will for my life is in this season. Paul's answer to both those folks in different seasons, his will for you is holiness. Peter, Paul, Moses, all of them. Again and again and again. It comes up on page after page after Scripture. And Wesley saw that. He was in England, in the Church of England in the 1700s, and he saw holiness in the Bible and didn't see much about it in the Church of England. And he believed that God had called him and the people called Methodists to reintroduce the church to God's will for their life. Now, a lot of people struggle with the language of holiness. It comes with a lot of baggage. Because we've experienced people sometimes who talk about holiness in really bad ways. Sometimes the folks who talk about holiness are quick to follow that language up with their list of rules that you must keep if you're going to fit their definition of holiness. Kind of a legalism thing. Like, here's what it means to be holiness, so here's what you got to do. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, keep the rules, you'll be holy. You break the rules, you're not. Maybe that's been your experience. If it is, put that on the shelf. We're going to find the Scripture talks very differently. I walked into a church one time and had some conversation around holiness with some of the leadership, and one of the guys came up and said, this isn't even a category for me. God is holy, not me, obviously. God is perfect. God is holy. He knows all things and is everywhere present and never makes a mistake. I'm not holy. And for him, it was about God's divine perfection, not about anything that could happen in me. Trouble with that is, we've just read these texts, and again and again and again, God says, you be holy because I'm holy. Whatever it is, it's something he apparently wants to share with us. The question is how? Somebody's probably sitting there thinking, easier said than done, preacher. Easier said than done. And that's true. But the invitation is maybe to kind of say, all right, we've seen this in the Scriptures. We've seen this in our Wesleyan tradition. Maybe there's something to it. So let's ask. And this is where Isaiah is helpful to us. Can we really be holy, let alone spread it to our neighbors and the nations? In Isaiah 6, we read about the prophet's experience of God's grace. It wasn't his first experience of God. He was a part of the covenant people. He worshiped God as a faithful Hebrew would. But on this day, when he had this vision, when he experienced God in this way, something changed. Nothing for him would ever be the same again. And the thing we're going to discover is the thing Isaiah discovered. If we want to be holy people, we need a fresh encounter with the Holy One. Because it's not the list of rules that makes you holy, it's the presence of God. And it's being and living in the presence of God. Let's look at Isaiah's experience. Here he is. Chapter 6 starts in maybe what would be for us a counterintuitive way. We're about to get this stunning vision of God, and the first thing we hear about is the death of the king, the year that King Uzziah died. But it's helpful to us because if we know about Uzziah, we know he was a great king. He was a strong administrator. The nation of Judah flourished under his leadership. Not only did they flourish internally, they were well defended and protected from their neighbors who were quite aggressive at times. 700 years or so before Jesus, the Assyrian Empire was the world power. They easily stomped little nations here and there underfoot. Under Uzziah, Judah felt safe. Now he's dead. It's very easy when a king you trust dies to find yourself hopeless, fearful, lost. The striking thing is, and Isaiah is about to learn this, it's those moments when the things and people we trust in this world go away that God makes himself known most fully and most powerfully and most beautifully. So Uzziah's dead. The king is dead. And the next thing Isaiah says is, I saw the Lord. Lord, king are both about people who rule over things. And we're about to get a description of the vision of God that emphasizes his kingship, emphasizes his sovereignty, emphasizes the height of his power. And no matter how good Uzziah was, the Lord is better. Way better. Big time better. And we're about to get that. So just listen to the way that this is described, that God is described here. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. You think, all right, kings sit on thrones. This isn't just any throne. It's a high throne, and it's lofty. Well, lots of thrones are high and lofty. Haven't you watched the movies? Anytime they go into the throne room, there's always some stairs you go up so the king or the queen can be head and shoulders above everybody when they're seated. And Isaiah's like, no, you don't get it. This throne was way big, bigger than the movies. How big was it, Isaiah? So think about the robe that the Lord is wearing. And you know what kind of kingly robes look like. Then go down to the hem. The hem? Yes, the hem. It filled the temple. How big is the throne? How big is the one who sits on the throne? The cuff on the leg of his pants finished at the ceiling. Well, how big is the one wearing the robe? You get the point? He's big. He's high. He's lofty. He is lifted up. I saw the Lord. I saw the King. I saw the Sovereign One. Sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. If the hem of his robe fills the temple, your building cannot contain his presence.